My name is Renata Ashworth. I'm 41. 6 months ago, my father's estate was closed. Signed, sealed, distributed, done. The house sold. The accounts settled. My brother and I stood in a parking lot outside the attorney's office in October, and we hugged, and we said something to each other about Dad finally being at peace, and we drove to our separate lives believing that the story had ended in the way stories are supposed to end, with an accounting that adds up and a door that closes softly instead of slamming. Then, 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday afternoon, a woman named Diane Petrosky called me from a law office 2 hours north of where my father had lived his entire life, and she asked me if I was sitting down. I want to tell you what she found in a filing cabinet in a dead attorney's storage unit, and what it changed, and what it did not change, because some of what a second will destroy cannot be undestroyed even when the paper says otherwise. Before I take you into it, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Only if this is landing somewhere real. Drop your location and local time below. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand my father before you can understand what this cost. My father was Walter Ashworth. He was 79 when he died, in March, in the bedroom of the house on Larkspur Lane where he had lived for 41 years, the house where I grew up, the house with the low ceiling in the upstairs hallway that he ducked under every single day of his life and never once fixed because, he told me once, ducking is a small tax and the house has been good to us and I don't mind paying it. That was Walter. A man who found meaning in small, specific loyalties. The same barber for 30 years. The same church pew, third from the back, left side, for longer than I've been alive. The same handwriting on every birthday card, a handwriting I would know blind, in the dark, with my hands tied behind my back, because I had spent 4 decades receiving it. He married my mother, Diane Ashworth, no relation to the attorney I'll get to in a moment, in 1971. She died when I was 19, of an illness that moved faster than anyone expected, and Walter never remarried. Not because he made some dramatic vow about it but because, I think, he had simply used up the specific kind of love he had for another person and didn't believe in generating a second batch of it. He had 2 children. Me, Renata, the older one. And my brother, Marcus, for years younger, who lives 90 minutes from where I do now and with whom I have always had the specific uncomplicated closeness of siblings who were never forced to compete for the same things. Want you to picture the kitchen table on Larkspur Lane, because that table is going to matter later, and because seeing it clearly now will help you feel the specific violence of what happened to it. It was oak. It had a burn mark near the left edge from a pot my mother set down without a trivet in 1988, a mark Walter refused to sand out because, he said, that mark has more of your mother in it than the wedding photos do. Sunday dinners happened at that table for 41 years. Marcus and I did homework at that table. My father wrote his will at that table, at least the first one, the one we knew about, on a Sunday afternoon in the autumn of 2019, with his attorney of 30 years, a man named Harold Byrne, sitting across from him with a leather folder and a fountain pen. I know it happened that way because Walter told me. He told me the way he told me most important things, offhand, mid-task, while doing something with his hands so that the weight of the sentence had somewhere to go besides my face. He was replacing a washer on the kitchen faucet when he said, "Renata, Harold and I finished the will last week. It's simple. House and everything in it split between you and your brother, straight down the middle, and I don't want either of you fighting about who gets the good china because, frankly, the china is ugly and neither of you should want it." I laughed. He didn't look up from the faucet. He said, "I mean it about the fighting, though. Your mother would come back from the dead to yell at both of you. That will was filed with Harold Byrne's office. It was the will that was read to Marcus and me in April, 5 weeks after Walter died, in a small conference room in a building I had never entered before, by an associate at Harold's firm because Harold himself, we learned that day, had died 18 months earlier, quietly, of a stroke, and his practice had been absorbed by 2 younger attorneys who had inherited his files along with his office furniture. The will was exactly what Walter described at the kitchen sink. House and estate split evenly. Modest life insurance policy, same. A small collection of tools to Marcus, specifically named, because Marcus had learned carpentry from Walter and Walter wanted the chisels to go to the hands that would use them. A box of my mother's jewelry to me, specifically named, because Walter said in the will itself, in his own dictated language, that Renata wore her mother's earrings to her own wedding and I want her to have the rest of what's left, I cried reading that line. Not because the will was complicated. Because it wasn't. Because my father, in the last legal document he would ever produce, had found a way to say something tender inside language that is normally cold by design. We settled the estate over the following 5 months. The house sold in July to a young couple with a toddler, and I stood in the driveway on the day of the final walkthrough and watched the toddler run across the front lawn where Marcus and I used to play, and I let myself feel something complicated and mostly good about that, the sense of a house passing forward into new life rather than simply closing. The accounts were divided. The tools went to Marcus. The jewelry came to me, and I want to tell you, because it matters to what comes later, that I opened that box the night I received it and found, underneath my mother's rings and her string of pearls, a folded note in my father's handwriting that said only, "She would want you to actually wear these, not keep them in a drawer." I have worn the pearls 4 times since. I count, the estate closed in October. Signed, sealed, done. Marcus and I hugged in that parking lot. I told you that already. I want you to hold on to the specific feeling of that hug, because I am about to take it away from you the same way it was taken away from me 3 weeks ago. On a Tuesday, at 2:40 in the afternoon, I was at my desk at work, in the middle of an unremarkable spreadsheet, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, area code from 2 hours north, a part of the state Walter hadn't lived in since before I was born but where he had grown up and where his older sister, my Aunt Carol, still lives. I almost let it go to voicemail. I want you to sit with that for a second. I almost didn't answer the call that changed everything, I answered. A woman's voice said, "Is this Renata Ashworth, daughter of the late Walter Ashworth?" I said yes. She said, "My name is Diane Petrosky. I'm an attorney, and I need to ask you to sit down if you're not already sitting, because I have information about your father's estate that is going to be difficult to hear." I was sitting. I told her I was sitting. She said, "I've recently taken over the archived files of an attorney named Robert Halloway, who passed away last year. Mr. Halloway had a small practice up here for almost 50 years. In going through his storage unit, which the state required us to inventory before disposal, we found a properly executed will belonging to your father, dated November of 2022. 3 years after the will, you probated it in April." I said, "That's not possible." My father's attorney was Harold Byrne. She said, "I understand there may have been 2 attorneys. I can only tell you what the document in front of me says, and what it says is that your father drove up here to this office on November the 14th, 2022, and executed a new will, witnessed by 2 staff members whose names are on the document, that explicitly revokes any prior will." I said, "Revokes it how?" She said, "Ms. Ashworth, I think this is a conversation better had in person, or at minimum with the physical document in front of you. Can you come to my office this week? I want to tell you about the drive up there, 2 hours, on a Thursday, because I spent that entire drive doing something I now recognize as a specific form of grief rehearsal, trying on different versions of what this could mean so that whatever version turned out to be true would land on a mind already partially braced. I thought, maybe it's nothing, maybe he just updated a beneficiary form somewhere. I thought, maybe he left something to a charity we didn't know about. I thought, and this is the thought I kept returning to, the one that made my hands tight on the steering wheel, maybe he changed something about Marcus and me. I didn't let myself finish that thought all the way. I didn't let myself ask which direction it might have changed. Diane Petrosky's office was small, above a hardware store, in a town I recognized only from photographs Walter had shown me of his childhood, a town he had left at 18 and rarely mentioned except in the specific fond, distant way people mention places that shaped them without claiming them. She was maybe 60, silver hair cut short and practical, reading glasses on a chain, and she had the will on the desk in front of her, in a plastic sleeve, when I walked in, and she did not make me wait. She said, I want to walk you through this slowly, and I want you to ask me to stop at any point if you need to. The 2022 will was 3 pages. Handled by Robert Halloway, an attorney my father had apparently found through his sister, my Aunt Carol, who I would learn had recommended Halloway specifically because he was local, because he had handled her own estate planning, and because, Diane told me later after some careful digging through Halloway's calendar notes, Walter had told Carol he wanted a will that wouldn't be, in his words, sitting in a file at the same office where everybody who works there already thinks they know my family's whole story. I want you to sit with that sentence, because it is the first piece of evidence, small and indirect, that my father did this deliberately, and quietly, and with some specific discomfort about the possibility of Harold Burns' office knowing what he was doing. The will revoked the 2019 document in full. It restated the same distribution of tools to Marcus and jewelry to me, nearly word for word, which told me something, sitting in that office, that steadied me for about 4 seconds before the next page destroyed it. Because on the second page, in a section addressing the house on Larkspur Lane and the remaining estate, the language had changed completely. Instead of an even split between Marcus and me, the 2022 will directed that 60% of the estate's value go to Marcus, and 40% to me. I read it twice. Diane let me. She didn't fill the silence. She let the sentence sit in the room with its full weight while I moved my eyes over it a second time, checking for a version of it that said something different than what it said. I said, why? My voice came out smaller than I intended. Diane said, the will doesn't state a reason in the distribution clause itself. Many wills don't. But there's an attached letter. Mr. Halloway kept it with the file, though it wasn't formally incorporated into the will's legal language. Would you like me to read it, or would you like to read it yourself? I asked her to read it. I don't fully know why. I think some part of me needed my father's words delivered by a voice that wasn't mine, so that I could receive them as information rather than as an event happening directly to me. She read, Renata, if you are reading this, I am gone. And I need you to understand something I could not find the courage to say to your face while I was alive, which tells you something about the size of it. In the spring of 2021, Marcus came to me. He had made a series of financial mistakes I am not going to detail here because they are his to tell you or not tell you, and he was in a position that frightened me badly, the kind of position where a man can make one more decision that cannot be undone. I gave him money. A significant amount. More than I have ever given either of you at any other point in your lives. I did not tell you because Marcus asked me not to, and because I was ashamed, on his behalf and somehow also on my own, of how close things had come. I have thought for 2 years about how to balance what I did for him against what would be fair to you, and I have landed, imperfectly, on this. The 40 and 60 is not a statement about how much I loved you. Renata, you have never for one single day of your life needed rescuing, and I am so proud of that I sometimes worried it meant you needed less from me, which I know now was its own kind of unfairness in the other direction. This is not a punishment of you. It is an accounting of a debt Marcus already owes the family, one I decided to settle myself, out of my own estate, rather than asking him to repay a father who wouldn't be alive to collect it. I am sorry that you are learning this from paper instead of from me. I could not find the words while I was breathing. I am hoping I can find them now that I am not. Diane stopped reading. I sat in that small office above a hardware store, 2 hours from home, and I did not cry immediately. I want to tell you honestly that the first feeling was not grief. It was a specific, sharp, almost administrative anger, the kind that arrives before the softer feelings have had time to organize themselves, and it was directed, in that first minute, entirely at the fact that a will existed that I had never seen, in a county I had never visited, handled by an attorney I had never heard of, who had then died with the only copy sitting in a filing cabinet that almost went to a shredding service along with the rest of his closed files. Ed, what happens now? Diane said, legally, the 2022 will supersedes the 2019 will, provided we can establish it was properly executed, which on its face it appears to be. 2 witnesses, notarization, standard revocation language. It means the distribution that already occurred, the even split, needs to be revisited. Practically, that means your brother received a portion of the estate he was not entitled to under your father's actual final wishes, and you received less than you were entitled to. Said, does Marcus know about any of this? Diane said, I have no way of knowing that. I only found this document 3 days ago. You are the first person I've called. Drove home that Thursday not knowing what I believed about my own brother. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think honesty about the ugliest part of a feeling is the only kind of honesty worth putting into a story like this. Somewhere on that drive, I let myself ask the question directly for the first time. Did Marcus know this existed? Had he sat across from me in that parking lot in October, hugging me, saying something about Dad being at peace, while holding a secret about a document that would have changed everything if it had surfaced? I did not want to believe that. I have loved my brother my entire life without a single serious rupture between us. But I want you to understand that the mind, once it has been shown one hidden thing, starts looking for others in every room it enters. Called Marcus that night. Not a text. A call, because some conversations deserve a voice even when the voice is about to shake. He answered on the second ring, the way he always does, and said, hey, what's up? In this specific easy tone of a brother who has no idea his entire understanding of the last 6 months is about to be rearranged. Said, Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth, even if the truth is going to be hard for me to hear. He said, okay, you're scaring me a little. What's going on? I said, did Dad ever tell you he gave you money in 2021? A significant amount. Did he ever tell you he was planning to account for it in his will? The silence on the other end of that call lasted, by my count, for full seconds. I know because I counted them the way you count the space between lightning and thunder, trying to measure how close the thing is. He said, how do you know about that? I felt something in my chest do a specific drop, the elevator cable snapping feeling of a fear confirming itself. I said, Marcus. He said, Renata, I didn't know he put anything about it in a will. I swear to you, I did not know that. I said, but you knew about the money. He said, yes. God, yes, I knew about the money, I lived it, I was the one who almost. He stopped. He started again. There was a period, in 2021, where I made some very bad decisions, financial decisions, and I was in real trouble, the kind of trouble where I genuinely did not know what I was going to do, and Dad found out, and he helped me. And he asked me never to tell you, because he said you'd worry, and because he was embarrassed for me and I think a little embarrassed for himself that he'd raised a son who could get into that kind of hole. I said, how much? He told me the number. It matched, almost exactly, the number implied by the 60-40 split against the estate's total value. I sat with the phone against my ear and did the math in real time and felt the specific vertigo of watching a hidden structure suddenly cohere into something you can finally see the shape of. Thad, why didn't you tell me after he died? He said, because I didn't think it mattered anymore. He helped me. I paid attention to what it cost me in terms of how I felt about myself, and I moved past it, and no one will mention it, so there was nothing to tell. I said, there is now. I told him about Diane Petrosky, about Robert Halloway's storage unit, about the letter, about the 40 and 60. I read him the letter, slowly, the way Diane had read it to me, because I thought my brother deserved to hear our father's own words rather than my summary of them. Marcus was quiet for a long time after I finished reading. Then he said, in a voice that had gone rough in a way I had heard from him only twice before in my life, once at our mother's funeral and once at our father's, he said, he never told me he was going to do that. I thought he just helped me and let it go. I didn't know he was carrying it like a debt that needed settling. I said, I don't think he thought of it as punishing you. I think the letter is pretty clear that he was trying to be fair to both of us at the same time, in a way he didn't know how to explain out loud. Marcus said, I need to give it back. I said, give what back? He said, the difference. Whatever the 20% works out to. I don't want it if it came from hiding something from you. I said, Marcus, it's not that simple, there's a legal process. He said, I don't care about the legal process, Renata. I care that you found out from a stranger in an office 2 hours away instead of from me, and that's on me even if I didn't know the will existed, because I knew about the money the whole time and I let you believe things were even when they weren't. Want to tell you what happened over the following weeks, because the resolution mattered as much as the discovery, and because I think the shape of the resolution is the part of this story that might actually be useful to you. Wherever you're watching from. Marcus and I retained a shared attorney, not adversarial counsel, a choice we made deliberately, sitting at my kitchen table, which is not the oak table from Larkspur Lane because that table sold with the house, but a table I bought for my own home years ago that I realized, halfway through that conversation, I had unconsciously set us up at in the same seating arrangement Marcus and I always used at our parents' table, him on my left, both of us facing the window. Old patterns hold their shape even in new rooms. The legal process to reopen a closed estate based on a subsequently discovered later will is not simple, and Diane Petrosky, who has continued to advise me even though her formal obligation ended the moment she handed over the document, was clear that we were fortunate the will's existence surfaced at all and doubly fortunate that Marcus's response, once he learned of it, was cooperative rather than contested. Contested will disputes between siblings, she told me, in the gentle voice of someone who has seen the alternative many times, generally end relationships as thoroughly as they end estates. Ours did not, because Marcus made a decision, in the first 10 minutes of learning the truth, to prioritize the relationship over the 20%. And that decision is the entire reason I can tell you this story without a chapter of estrangement folded into it. The redistribution is still being finalized through the county's probate court, a process expected to take another 2 to 3 months. But Marcus and I have already agreed privately, in writing, witnessed by our own attorney, on how the adjustment will be handled once the legal mechanics catch up to what we've already decided between the two of us at that kitchen table. He is transferring the difference directly. Not because a judge will ultimately require him to, though one likely will, but because he told me, on that first phone call, that he didn't want to wait for a court order to do the thing our father actually asked him to do. I drove up to see Aunt Carol 2 weekends ago. I hadn't seen her since Walter's funeral, and I wanted to understand what she knew, if anything, about the second will. She is 76, sharp, direct in the specific way I recognize as an Ashworth family trait passed down through whichever branch gets it. She told me she had recommended Robert Halloway to Walter because Walter had called her, out of nowhere, in the fall of 2022, and asked if she knew a good attorney who wasn't the same one he'd used for 40 years. She said she didn't ask why. She said, "Your father called things private when he wanted them private, and you learned a long time ago not to push on that door when it was shut." She said, "I knew he went and did something up there, some kind of paperwork, but he never told me what, and I never asked, because that's who we are in this family. We let people carry what they need to carry until they're ready to set it down." I sat with Aunt Carol in her kitchen, drinking coffee that was too strong the way she has always made it too strong, and I thought about my father driving 2 hours north, alone, in 2022, 76 years old, to sit in a small office above a hardware store and correct something privately that he could not bring himself to correct out loud. I thought about him ducking under that low hallway ceiling on Larkspur Lane every single day for 41 years rather than fixing it, because the small tax of it connected him to something he valued more than convenience. I thought about the letter, and the specific line in it, that I have never for one single day of my life needed rescuing, and I understood, sitting in that kitchen, that my father had spent his whole life believing that my strength was a kind of gift I gave him, when really it was something he built in me, on purpose, over 4 decades, and then quietly worried, at the very end, that the gift had cost me something in his attention that Marcus received in a different form. He was wrong about that. I want to say that directly, to him, even though he can't hear it. Dad, you did not owe me a rescue to prove you loved me. You owed me the truth while you were alive, and you knew that, and I think the second will and the letter attached to it were you trying, in the only way you knew how, at 79, with time running out, to give me the truth in the only form you could manage, which was paper, delivered late, imperfectly, but delivered. I want to talk to you directly now, wherever you are, whatever time it is. A second will surfaced in my family because a small-town attorney died and his storage unit got inventoried before disposal, and because a woman named Diane Petrosky did her job carefully instead of quickly. If Robert Halloway's files had been shredded on schedule, the way closed practice files sometimes are, none of this would have surfaced, and Marcus and I would have lived the rest of our lives inside an even split that our father, in his own words, in his own handwriting, explicitly did not want. I don't think my father did anything monstrous. I want to be careful about that, because I think it would be easy to turn this into a story about a father who played favorites, and that is not what this is. This is a story about a man who tried, imperfectly and late, to balance 2 kinds of love against 2 very different kinds of need, and who could not find the courage to have the conversation with either of his children directly, and who left instead a paper trail that very nearly did not survive to reach us. If there is a version of your family's story sitting in a filing cabinet somewhere, in an attorney's office you've never visited, attached to a decision someone made and could not say out loud, I hope it finds you the way this one found me. Not through concealment holding forever, but through someone doing their job carefully, and a phone ringing on an ordinary Tuesday, and a voice on the other end asking if you're sitting down. I am. I was. And I am still sitting with it, some days better than others, holding my father's honesty and his cowardice in the same hand, the way you sometimes have to hold both halves of a person to actually understand the whole of them. That is today's story on the Family Ledge. Leave a comment wherever you are watching from. Tell me what time it is, And tell me if there is a conversation in your own family that someone is currently trying to solve with paper instead of with their own voice. I read every single one. Subscribe for the next story every week. Check the description for another one I think you will connect with. Thank you for being here.